I'm Delaney Krieger, and you're listening to the monthly Tools of the Trade Toolbox Talk.
Welcome, please welcome
to another episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast, your number one construction industry resource. Hear conversations with industry professionals to get the tools, stories, and advice that you need to set your career on fire. You're now streaming the Tools of the Trade podcast.
Hey guys, before I introduce today's guest, I wanted to introduce the presenting partner of the Tools of the Trade monthly Toolbox Talks, the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. And the reason why the CAF excites me so much and why I think this partnership is so important right now is because apprenticeship is not something that you can just do haphazardly. Like most things that require skilled training and require people to become engaged and interested in, it requires a lot of research and development to understand why people are interested, why they're not interested, how we can better support our apprentices, and how we can build the programs out to ensure success. And that's where the CAF comes in. So the CAF is a national not-for-profit organization working with apprenticeship stakeholders in all regions of Canada. CAF members are apprenticeship champions, practitioners, and trainers committed to apprentice success. And an idea of an apprenticeship champion could be an organization that has an amazing apprenticeship program. They believe that Canada's world-class apprenticeship system can only get better when we understand what is working, collaborate to address barriers, and connect with tomorrow's skilled workforce. The CAF advocates for a sustainable Canadian apprenticeship system which contributes to economic growth. By adding their voice to the advocacy efforts of their members, they help ensure apprenticeship is a focus of government policy and included in political party platforms. And that's a bit of a tongue twister right there. CAF members support research and activities not viable through project funding. Access to member-only reports and resources, preferred attendance at in-person events, and insights from the Apprentices in Canada e-panel are just some of the value members receive in return. They are consistently monitoring member engagement, making adjustments to member benefits to increase value, and now member-driven activities and reports make up more than half of all of their resources. If you would like to tap into this extensive national network, download online research reports, and access helpful resources, become a Canadian Apprenticeship Forum member today at caf-fca.org. That's caf-fca.org. What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning into episode number 5 of the Tools of the Trade monthly Toolbox Talk. I'm your host, Colin Toop, and in these Toolbox Talk segments, I have short, current, day-in-the-life conversations with individuals who work in all aspects of the construction industry. And the goal is to not only get the story of what a day in their shoes looks like so that maybe you can relate or you can think about potentially being in that person's shoes, but I like to ask the tough questions that we need the answers to in order to progress as an industry. So recently, if you've been listening or if you've been on my social media, I put out a call to action asking you to send in your questions through Instagram, Facebook, or the website. And it was a success, and I got quite a few questions, and I was able to ask a couple of these questions on this episode itself. So as a reminder, I want to ask the questions that you may want answers to from my guests. So ahead of time, I'm going to be putting out all of the guests that are coming up over the next couple weeks. I'm going to leave all sorts of areas for you to be able to provide me with questions that you want answered. I will tag you back if you want me to. If not, we can stay anonymous. That's totally cool. And just a reminder, my Instagram is @ToolsPodcast. The Facebook group is Tools Podcast. The website is toolspodcast.com, where you can find more contact information for myself, send me an email, as well as more social accounts such as LinkedIn. And follow me and see which sorts of guests I have coming up. As I mentioned, shoot me your questions wherever you can, and I will be compiling all of those and hopefully reading them live and getting them answered on the episode. Today's guest is a first-year apprentice carpenter named Delaney Krieger. And although Delaney is a minority as a young woman on site, that hasn't hindered her pursuit to be the best carpenter that she can be. In this Toolbox Talk, we get into the following: what a typical day looks like for a first-year carpenter, how trade school is essentially free and how to get paid while doing it, what it's like being a woman on site and dealing with the job site banter, how to survive your apprenticeship, and her best accomplishments so far. To get in touch with Delaney or to find out more information about her story, head over to toolspodcast.com/May for this month's Toolbox Talk show notes from all of my guests. And don't forget to send me your questions on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or anywhere that you happen to find Tools Podcast. With all that being said, let's jump right into this episode with Delaney Krieger. Delaney, thank you so much for joining me on Tools of the Trade Monthly Toolbox Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super pumped.
So am I. You know what? You're the first apprentice that I've had on the Toolbox Talk. You're the second female, and I feel that there's a lot of territory to explore here. And like I've mentioned to you before, and like I've mentioned to a lot of other people, the Toolbox Talk is to try and paint a picture of what a day in your shoes looks like, A, so that people can see the other side of the fence. Maybe they forget what it's like to be an apprentice, but B, if there's somebody looking to get into the industry, I want to be able to try and provide a resource that can help other people understand what it's like to be, in your case, an apprentice carpenter and a female in the industry. So we have a lot of cool stuff to cover here. And I just thought I'd ask you by asking how your day went, because I know we started this a bit late. You were on site. So what were you up to today?
So today we ended up yesterday at like 2 p.m. It was second break. My boss was like, hey, can you come in tomorrow? And so, of course, I'll never say no to work. So, basically the beginning of my day started with just cleanup. We've got a lot of drywall scraps on the floors and stuff. So just kind of collecting it when the building's somewhat empty is a big thing, because we do have a lot of people on site, and trying to, in the rise of COVID-19, we're trying to keep our distance as much as possible. So today kind of gave me that opportunity to, load up the lift and bring it all over and dump it in the bin. So it started off with that. And then I've been working on, there's holes in the drywall where they're running ductwork through. So we need to line that with drywall. So I worked on a bit of that. And yeah, good times.
And what kind of project is it?
So it's a 4-story, I believe it's 32 unit condo building. So it's one of the bigger sites that I've ever been on, which is really interesting, but it's cool because I've also been on the site for about a month or 2 months now. So I've really been able to see it grow, and that's been a crazy experience in and of itself.
No kidding. So let's just, obviously we know that you're a carpenter because I've already talked about it, but just for those listening that may not be in Toronto, that may not know who you are, why don't you just tell us who you are and what trade you're in and a little background about yourself?
So as you said, my name is Delaney Krieger. I'm a first-year carpentry apprentice. I just recently hit my 1,500 hour mark. So if you don't know about the whole hour system, it's roughly about 1,800 hours per level for us. And that takes about a year. So in hopefully about a month and a half, I'll be up to level 2, which I'm super pumped for. So I'm a carpentry apprentice with Local 494, which is the local carpenters union in Windsor-Essex County. And I started last July and kind of hit the ground running, and I've been putting in solid 40 plus hour work weeks ever since, and loving it.
Amazing. Really cool. So as I mentioned to people before on Instagram and on my other social platforms, as well as on the intros to this podcast, I will be answering some questions that did come from people throughout Instagram. So the first question, which is something that I was going to ask you anyways, is from RMC Mechanical. My buddy Rob, he's been on the Toolbox Talk as well, is why carpentry? Why did you decide to become a carpenter?
So, I'm going to break this down into 2 different answers. So first of all, just why did I choose the trades to begin with is a huge answer. So basically what I did in high school, in the later years of my high school career, I kind of sat down and I said, what do I want to do? I kind of had this moment where, what do I want to wake up, and what is the 8 to 10 hours that I work? What is that going to look like? And I kind of built my career path around that. So I looked at it and I said, well, I really like being outside. I really like kind of not being confined in one area all the time, having lots of space to just do whatever. And so that was a big part of it. But then also I liked being active. I liked physical activity. I hated the idea of sitting behind a desk. That would be my worst nightmare. So, that obviously axed out quite a bit of jobs. But also then I looked at, there's so many ways that you can kind of hone in on skills and focus on different things. So that was a big attractive feature for me, was the fact that there's so many different skills in the trades that I could learn. And when you learn these things, you can kind of go wherever with them, which is awesome. So,
yes,
looking in at just the trades in general, it fit for me. There's so many things I can learn. You're really active, and a lot of the work is outside, so it fit perfectly. And then to choose carpentry in general, I kind of looked at it and I wanted the widest variety. Something that I really struggled with is doing the same thing every day. That is my worst nightmare. And with carpentry, what I found was there's on job sites, carpenters are there from the time that it's a hole in the ground to when the finishing touches are being put on. Like we do form work, we do framing, there's so many trim, doors and hardware, like everything kind of along the way is done by a carpenter. So I like the idea of kind of almost nourishing a job site from start to finish, I guess. That really appealed to me. Plus, every aspect of carpentry was just attractive. So yeah, that definitely influenced my decision.
Yeah, you know what? I think that was mine as well, is when you have a skill in a skilled trade, you can take that with you forever. And it's goes a long way to know how to do things around your house and the things that other people may not know how to do. And although you do get that in other careers, you may not be putting forth that same skill set on a daily basis in your personal life as you would with a trade. Like, I do things around the house all the time. I can wire switches and plugs, and I'm in a condo, so it's a little different, but it's good to have those tools that you can apply to your life and that some of your friends don't know how to do. So it's funny when they call you and there's side jobs and all that stuff. So it's great to get into. But you've talked about why trades and why carpentry. So my next question is, and this is more for anybody that hasn't gotten into trades yet, is how do you get in? Like, what does the process look like? Walk me through hours and schooling and give me the whole wrap up for how you get into the trades.
So basically, this is the route that I took. You had mentioned that you'd had one other female guest, and that was Noor. She has kind of created this nonprofit organization to promote women in male-dominated industries. So I actually attended one of her events. It's called Build a Dream. So I went to a Build a Dream expo in high school, and I connected with the local carpenters union and talked to them there. And from there, they kind of just I kind of asked them, I was like, should I go to, college for it? Should I take a college program? Should I just, get thrown into work? Like, what's the best avenue? And they said, as soon as you graduate high school and want to, get into it seriously, like, come to our office, come figure it out, that sort of thing. So, I did just that. I graduated high school. I ended up showing up at their office like every single day for like a week straight, probably 2 weeks, honestly, dropping off a resume. Are you guys hiring? Can you take me on yet? How can I get this ball rolling? So that was a big thing, was just kind of being persistent there. But finally they signed me on as an apprentice. I got all signed up, all registered, all that. And basically what the Carpenters Union does is they dispatch you to other companies. So a contractor will call the Carpenters Union and say, hey, I need 3 journeymen and 2 apprentices. And then the union has a list of, apprentices and journeymen who are able to go to work. So first time I got called out, I would only work there for a week. It was for a scaffolding company. So that was my first job ever in my apprenticeship. And it was pretty crazy because I didn't even know like scaffolding was part of carpentry up until the day before I was doing it.
Yeah.
So I kind of got tossed in there. And then after about a week, like I only worked like 24 hours, I think, and then was laid off and then back on the list. And within a week, they had me back out with another company, and I've been with the same company ever since, which has been really awesome. But basically the way it works is the full apprenticeship is 7,200 hours. It roughly takes about 4 years to complete. So each level is broken down into 1,800 hours. Level 1, you just work for 1,800 hours. So that's what I'm currently just wrapping up right now. Level 2, when we get into level 2, it'll be your 1,800 hours of work plus trade school 1. So I think it's either 6 or 8 weeks of trade school, and that's you're laid off for that period of time and you just focus on going to school. And then what we also have is additional training courses that we need to complete. So we have a lot of weekend courses. We have a training center at our union hall where it'll be like different things like advanced forms, like just kind of getting your hands on these types of things and figuring it out, because a lot of times if you're, in my case right now, I'm not working for a company that does form work. So it's kind of a way to get experience with form work without having to work for that company.
Gotcha.
So level 2, like I said, it'll be, another 1,800 hours plus schooling plus courses, and level 3 is the same and level 4 is the same. And then once you finish all that, you write your red seal, which is pretty daunting. Honestly, I'm kind of terrified of that. But you write your red seal, and then once you write your red seal and you pass it, you're a fully licensed carpenter.
And so the red seal means that you can work across Canada. And I know it's different by province. So if somebody's listening in BC, I'm pretty sure it's 6,000 hours. School is 10 weeks. And that's kind of a bit different on the BC side. So there's a few avenues to pursue. And I'm not sure if you know this or not, but are you eligible for any government grants or any funding when you go to school?
So essentially, I know that with our union hall, we pay, I think it's like around $500 tuition, and then we're actually reimbursed after the fact, once we pass trade school. So my schooling's essentially free. But once you level up, there are Canadian grants, they're incentive grants. And I know that the one specifically for women in trades is significantly higher. So that is a huge attractive feature for a young woman trying to get into the trades, is every time you level up, you're given a grant. You're given free money essentially for just working. This is just a, hey, thanks for being a female on the job site, which is honestly, that was one of the reasons why I chose this industry was, hey, I'm getting paid to learn. Why would I not take advantage of that, right?
And do you know, when you go back to school, you probably incur a layoff. Do you know if you get to collect employment insurance when you go to school?
Yeah. So I've talked to a lot of guys, and they say that usually you set up your EI prior to going to school. So you kind of have it all your paperwork's kind of set up so that when you are laid off, you kind of start receiving right away. But even I've talked to a few guys who have been in a situation where the paperwork was messed up or whatever happened, and they did, receive EI after the fact, and it was all back paid for the past 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, however long they have been going without income.
Yeah. So just to underscore that is right out of high school, you're working basically within 2 weeks of knocking on the door. You have a salary right away. You work 1,800 hours, you get to go to school, which is reimbursed. And whether you're a man or a woman in the trade, obviously the benefit is a little different, but you get reimbursed through a grant. And then when you go to school, you collect employment insurance. So you're getting paid to be there. So really, you're actually getting paid to go to schools. Now, that is something that you won't get in any other industry. And that is very important, I think, to underscore. So if people are on the fence about becoming an apprentice, just think about that right there. No debt. You're making good salary right out of high school. You're learning skills right out of high school. And if you combine all weeks of school, you're in school for less than a calendar year. Like in BC, it's 40 weeks. In Ontario, it's like, what, 32?
Roughly, I believe so, yeah.
So if you think about that for a second, that is right there a selling feature, in my opinion, to join the trades.
Yeah. And another thing too is when we level up, our wages are set for the entire 4 years of our apprenticeship. And every time we level up, each raise is like $3 or $4. I think the biggest raise is between your second and third year. And that's like a $6 raise just for working, just for learning, just for, you grow so much over these 4 years, and you're rewarded financially like every day. So it's pretty cool.
That's amazing. Now, maybe you can't answer this because you went the union route, but do you know anybody else as an apprentice that has found it hard to get a job?
Yeah, honestly, I've heard a couple stories where it's, I've heard of a few guys just kind of knocking on companies' doors and being like, hey, this is what I want to do. Can you help me out? And I've heard that it can be pretty tough because, and I see it from an employer standpoint as well, where you're kind of taking a risk on this person. You don't really know if they're going to be able to commit to this job. It is a bit of a commitment becoming an apprentice. You have to make sure that you're able and willing to put in hard work every day, be there on time, all of these things, because when someone opens this knowledge to you, they're essentially like teaching you, they're building you up from the ground. And most people, when they get into it, they don't know anything. Like for me personally, I had no past experience at all. So, coming into this trade, you're essentially starting from rock bottom, and you have to take your chances with an employer, and they have to take their chances on you. And if I build this person up, are they going to be able to perform for me? And so I definitely see it in that standpoint, which is kind of why I'm glad I took the union route, because that is really daunting to me, especially as a female in the trades. I thought about that a lot, where if I was going around knocking on company doors and being like, hey, can you teach me everything that and it's definitely being a huge risk, right? Am I able to perform, am I able to meet these standards, right? So yeah, it's been pretty well. I'm glad it all worked out the way it did, but yeah.
No, for sure. And I think you're right about that. There's a lot of pressure on the employer to bring on apprentices these days, but there also is pressure on the apprentice themselves. And I think it's important for anybody listening that may be taking the non-union route and going to look for work right away there's bare minimums that you need to have. Like, you need to have bare minimum tools. You need to have reliable transportation. You have to be willing to show up and work. Overtime is quite common in construction, so you have to be willing to physically put that time in. And if you can check all those boxes and present those to an employer and say that you're willing and ready to soak up all that knowledge and put in the work for that employer, you're gonna have a better chance. So I think if anybody's planning on going down that route, just have everything prepared ahead of time and ready to go, so that you can show these people, I know what you think your risk is in hiring me, but here's what I've done to mitigate that risk. And that may be a good jump off point for people looking to get in that seem to be having a hard time. It's not just a matter of saying, oh, I finished school or I did this and you should hire me. It's like, no, you have to show some initiative. It's not, even though it's easy, we've made it sound really easy. It's not that easy. You have to put the work in and show that you're willing to be there, show up and enjoy what you do and learn it all.
Yeah, that's definitely it. That dedication is something that is pretty rare nowadays. In my generation, I found, like you said, you have to, have reliable transportation. You have to have your bare minimum tools. These are things that not a lot of people are willing to get and willing to provide for an employer. So kind of starting with that is a good starting point, and then building off that.
Yeah.
Sure.
So what do you need? What do you need as an apprentice carpenter for like your minimum toolkit?
Minimum tools, I started out with no power tools or anything. Basically, obviously your PPE, so hard hat, safety boots, all that stuff. But then you get your tool pouch. So I just bought, I think, like a $50, not even, tool pouch, just kind of learn how to even wear one, really. You have to get used to it. That hammer was a big one. Obviously, I had tape measure, obviously, had a speed square, which is really big for, a lot of times when we start out, you just start out making cuts, you're cutting material, that's all you're doing. I had like a basic screwdriver set, just kind of basic necessities. And then when I showed up to job sites and said, okay, what do you have in your tool pouch, was something that I asked a lot of, like, the journeyman that I was working with was, okay, this is what we're doing, I'm going to be working alongside of you, what do you have in your tool pouch? So then that's when I got into, I got chisels, I got, keyhole saws, I got different things like that. And that's kind of how I built up my tool pouch.
Yeah, what's funny is my first job ever in construction was carpenter's helper, believe it or not. And I remember it was a 100-year-old house, and we were lifting it up and putting a basement in. It was heritage. And I was doing just that. I was making cuts, and I had this guy yelling at me, like 28 and 3/8, 28 and a quarter. And I didn't know how to read my tape measure. And believe it or not, I couldn't read a tape measure. And I made 20 cuts, and they're all wrong. And this guy looks at me, he's like, what are you doing? I'm digressing here, but I think it's kind of funny that I have a tape measure beside me right now because I've been measuring stuff, but I didn't know how to read one until I had to get yelled at. But
honestly though, that's the best way to learn. When I first started reading it, I would literally sit there and count the 16ths, and that's how I learned how to read it. But like you said, you'll just get numbers thrown at you and just yelled at you, and you're like, oh my gosh. So I actually came home, and I would literally just come up with numbers in my head, and I would find them and just have that efficiency. And within a week, honestly, I can read a tape measure like the back of my hand now, right? But just I literally practice on a 2x4.
That's so funny. So what does a day look like for you on site? Walk me through what your typical starting time is and what you do at work every day as an apprentice.
So that's actually a really funny question, because at around 5:30 in the morning, I get a text from, our production supervisor, and it has an address. And, in the wintertime, maybe there's some details. Oh, you're working inside, you're working outside, dress for the elements type of deal. But until I showed up, had my boots on at that job site, I had no idea what I was doing. So that kind of made it fun and exciting in a way because, every day was a new adventure. But I had to learn to be prepared for every single situation that I, could be in. Like I have every single tool that I own has to be in my truck at all times because I never know what I'm going to be thrown into in the morning. So, but typically what happens is usually start time varies based on site, but usually it's about 7 o'clock, 7:30. Sometimes it's 8 o'clock if we have to wait for materials to show up or whatever it is. And first thing I do is obviously go find, the other guys that work for my company, just kind of figure out what are we even doing here? Like, what does our contract say we're doing here? And then also, where do I fit into that? Sometimes it's grab a broom and, clean up the job site for the day. Things have gotten a little messy around here. We need help straightening it up. Sometimes it's we need an extra set of hands. We're hanging 5/8, fire rated ceilings all day. And those are really heavy on the arms. So, just an extra set of hands up there. Big help. Sometimes it's making cuts. Like I said, that's a huge one, making cuts on siding. That's kind of how I started out, doing a lot of cuts for siding and soffit. Just kind of basic things. Now that I've gotten some experience under my belt, when I show up to a job site, it's more so, okay, I'm going to give you a specific task. It's pretty simple, walk you through it and let you do it. So that's been huge for me because it kind of gives me the time to kind of fiddle around with these things, figure them out on my own, trial and error. The more I do things, like the easier it is. So yeah, I kind of problem solve and do whatever. So yeah, it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember those days. You have to have like rain boots, you have to have rain gear, you have to have sweaters, you have to have all your tools, and everything's usually in like a Rubbermaid bin in the back of your vehicle. And you just don't know, like you could be inside for like half the day and then it starts raining and then they throw you outside, and you're right. It's a new adventure every day. But
yeah, that's literally what it is. Like I opened the back of my truck and half a wardrobe falls out. There's mud everywhere. There's tools everywhere. It's just a disaster, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think that makes it fun. So another question I have here is from Chase Little 1324. And I heard that he's actually one of your good friends. So shout out to Chase. He asked, what do you think your biggest challenge was for getting that type of job?
Yeah, honestly, Chase is my best friend. Like he's been here through it all, really. I've called him crying on job sites sometimes, like, oh, I'm so frustrated. Whenever something goes well, I automatically call him. So shout out to him. But basically, like the biggest thing for getting onto the job site was I am so outnumbered. Like that's just the fact of it. On a job site, I can literally, in the past year, I can count the amount of women I've encountered on a job site probably on my two hands. There has been a handful of women that I've encountered, and it's so memorable because it's so rare that I can tell you their names, what company they worked for, what they did, what day I was with them, what I was doing, what they were doing. Like it's such a rare thing that it sticks out in your mind so much. But like being outnumbered, it can definitely work to your advantage in the sense that, if you're on a job site with, let's say 100 guys, everyone's going to remember the one girl. As an apprentice, you're kind of swept under the rug a lot. Like you don't really get that much recognition.
Right.
But unless you do something really, really bad, but you don't really want to be that really, unless you're the guy who like makes pipes burst or whatever, you don't want to be that guy. But as a female, you're automatically known, which is really great because they can recognize the work that you're doing, the work ethic and all of that. So it's really kind of a benefit in that sense. But when you're outnumbered and you don't see other females on a job site, there's certain things that you kind of have to figure out on your own. And this is a really small example, but I think it really sums up what it's like. So when I first started working, obviously you have to wear hard hats, right? I had no idea how to wear my hair under a hard hat. And I had no other female to look at to be like, oh, that's how she does it. Like, oh, cool.
Right.
Like I have very long hair and I can't put it in a traditional ponytail. Like you can't drill a hole in your hard hat to put a ponytail through. So I couldn't do that. When I wore a low ponytail, I found that like I would sweat like crazy on my neck. So finally I figured out, braids on the sides of my head or even one braid on the one side, like that worked for me. But kind of that trial and error where I didn't have anyone to look to. So that was definitely difficult in the sense that I had nobody there, you know what I mean? So you can't ask the guys with the short hair how they wear their hair under their hard hat. Like, it's pretty self-explanatory, but yeah.
Yeah, you know what? That's something you don't think about, and that definitely leads me into my next sort of set of questions is exactly what it's like, A, being an apprentice, but B, being a woman on the job site. And part of this podcast segment is to ask the tough questions that we need the answers to progress as an industry. And those are some things that even right now I didn't think about, like how do you wear your hair, or are you using the same bathroom? Just the little things that gender differences require on a job site that you may not think about, and that most of us don't think about. And these job sites aren't, it's easier for a man, I'm not going to lie, to get around. It's easier to just, you go into a dirty porta potty on site and you can just stand up. You don't have to worry about sitting down all the time, and all the little things that you take for granted as a man, having that freedom that you don't think about. And like you mentioned, there's no role models, nobody you can go and be like, hey, this is my first time. I'm not sure how to wear my hair under a hard hat. There's nobody to teach you that. And so what I wanted to ask you here was, I've been poking and prodding for some tough questions amongst different guests, and there's kind of two aspects, as I mentioned, to this. And the first aspect is being a woman on a job site. And I know that you and I have had some offline conversations, and I've asked you what it's been like. And one of the things that comes to mind and comes up in conversation is job site banter. And if anybody's not aware of what job site banter is, I've talked about it before, but essentially it's largely a boys club on site. When you get to site, as you mentioned, you're outnumbered. And as people know, when you're in a crowd and you're in a crowd of the same sex, you tend to act a certain way. And everybody knows what guys are like when guys are together. And I'm sure that you experienced that as well. And I wanted to know what the job site banter has been like for you, because I definitely have some stories that I can share, but I'd be curious to know what job site banter is like in a day for you, and if it's hard to deal with sometimes.
The best way to answer this question is that it varies from crew to crew. It definitely varies. I've traditionally, like, you would think like the older guys are, kind of closed-minded and, stuck in their ways and have this old school mentality. But some of the best people that I've worked with have been almost retired guys, just kind of passing on their knowledge. But definitely what I've experienced is that the guys that I work with consistently, like the guys on my crews, they're more accepting. Like they know that I'm there to work. They know what I'm capable of and that I have that work ethic. So they've already kind of gotten used to working with me. I remember when I was just starting out, everyone was terrified to talk to me because everyone was just terrified that they would say the wrong thing or, whatever it was. But the more they got comfortable with me, the more they started to kind of, now we'll joke around, and like, don't get me wrong, like they'll chirp me, but I'll chirp right back. Like, that's just who I am. And I feel like that's kind of helped me be seen on a level playing field with them when I'm able to take jokes, but not only take jokes, but also give them back. I throw it right back at them. So it's one of those things where developing that can be actually very useful. But in certain situations, it is pretty difficult to navigate because we were talking about this earlier, where apprentices are kind of treated like bottom of the barrel scum. Like, there's no other way to listen, or that's just how you learn. And There is definitely something to be said about, if you get yelled at for something, you will learn how to do it properly. If you were yelled at because you couldn't read a tape measure, you're going to make sure you know how to read a tape measure.
Absolutely.
But I found that there's a fine line between kind of yelling at someone to break them down or yelling at someone to push them to, better themselves. And obviously, nobody likes getting yelled at. But there have been situations where I have gone up to guys that I've worked with and been like, you know what, thank you. Thank you for pushing me, because when they push me, when they get on my nerves, something stubborn just clicks in me and I'm like, I have to do this now. Like, I have no choice but to prove them wrong. So kind of when they are kind of pushing me towards greatness, that is an unexplainable feeling. And it's definitely a very helpful tool for learning. But like I said, sometimes there's just comments that are made, and you just kind of deal with it. Something that I've learned to do is just totally ignore it. entirely. Most times it does come from a very deep place of ignorance. So I kind of let it roll off my back. Something that I have found though, which has been really interesting, is it's more so other trades around me. So it's more so the guys that I have never talked to, maybe I'm doing drywall and they're laying bricks or whatever it is. We're completely on opposite ends. Like, I've never talked to them. They're the ones who typically make the comments, which is really interesting. Like, they'll make just subtle comments like, oh, are you getting your nails dirty today, or stuff like that. And it's just like, haha, very funny. Like, I don't really know how to respond to that. But yeah, definitely like just ignoring it. Most of the time it's pretty manageable, surprisingly, once you get used to just kind of, this is what it is, right?
Yeah. And, I don't think it should happen. And obviously people have their ways of displaying their discomfort when something's new. When you're working with a woman on site, it may be your first time, it may be a new experience. So that may be your way of showing that that they're there, and that, it's kind of like that feeling where you make a joke to try and lighten the situation or something. So they say something like, oh, are you getting your nails dirty today? But I'm sure, and I don't know if you've experienced this yet in your career, but do you find that sometimes you may walk into an area or a room and people have to change what they're talking about?
Oh, every single day. It was more so when I first started out. A lot of these guys were meeting me for the first time and they were like, oh my gosh, it's not only a female, but a young female. Like, what do we say around her? They treated me like I was kind of like this animal. Like, they were terrified of me, which was definitely an interesting feeling, being, a 20-year-old woman showing up, not knowing anything about construction, and having these guys who have been doing it for 60 years just kind of back off of it. But the more they got to know me and the more they got comfortable with me, they realized that I'm just one of them. Yes, I may look a little different. I do have longer hair. Sometimes my nails are painted, but at the end of the day, I'm just one of the other guys, and that's been a huge breakthrough for me, is just being able to be treated like one of the guys.
Yeah.
So it's definitely kind of taken some time for that to kind of subside, but it is working, and it does get better with time.
So what advice would you lend any women or young women that are scared to get in construction because of the gender barrier?
Honestly, half the time it's more funny than it is hurtful. Like you said, like, those comments, it's trying to lighten the mood, and it's definitely just awkward for everyone. Honestly, yeah. That's the best way to describe it, is nobody really knows how to handle this situation, and navigating it with these people kind of brings you together in a way where it's like, oh, like, what can I say around you? What can I say around you? Should I not be saying this in general? Like, things like that. So it definitely is kind of awkward. Like anything anything new is always going to be awkward. There's going to be, people are going to screw up. People are going to be automatically great at it, but stick with it. And honestly, it comes with time. You learn certain situations, exactly how to react, and just stick with it, honestly.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we're also kind of talking about here is there is a difference between just being an apprentice and, being a female on site. And when I was an apprentice, when I first started and I was a carpenter's helper, I mean, the tape measure thing is an aside, but, I remember not ever being able to tie an extension cord correctly, or being stuck out in the rain just moving pumps around, or being like yelled at for no apparent reason. And all you're trying to do is do the job that you don't know how to do. And sometimes you're not taught how to do. And instead of somebody showing you the right way, they'll say, go wrap that extension cord. You go wrap it, you wrap it wrong. And then all of a sudden you just did the worst thing on site. What do you mean you don't know how to wrap an extension cord? And then here, let me show you. And it just becomes like, I remember some very hard days in construction questioning if that was the career path I want to be in. But I think, like you mentioned, if you understand that may be what it's like in the beginning, it doesn't necessarily come from a place of hate, and it may not necessarily be gender specific, but you're learning, and in construction, there's a lot at risk. There's time, there's money, there's materials. You're working with power tools. There's a danger aspect. So I think some people also feel the responsibility for an apprentice. So it's just important to see the light at the end of the tunnel and know that it may require a bit more of a backbone in the beginning. But if you're able to establish that and learn your place on site, no matter who you are or what level you're in construction, that it can be a great place and an inclusive place. And it just takes time to get there. And, obviously some companies are better than others. So you just have to find what's right for you.
Yeah, for sure. Something that I actually found pretty helpful for me was showing that vulnerability, kind of like you said, like these are things that I've never done before. And a lot of people just expect you to know how to do it. And I think, the older that they are, the more they are kind of expecting you to do it, because, you think of a lot of these guys who have been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, they haven't been an apprentice. They haven't been in your shoes for such a long time that for them, it's like second nature at this point. Like now they can wrap an extension cord in their sleep with their eyes closed. Like there's certain things that when you're starting out are super difficult, but then, after doing them for years upon years, it's like nothing. So kind of reminding them, hey, I've never done this before. Like, this is not my fault. Teach me how to do it. I'll work on doing it. And, with time, I will be better. But right now I have no idea what I'm doing. Kind of showing that vulnerability makes you a person, and they see you as like a person, not just someone who's doing the job wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So next question here, to digress a little bit away from that topic, is from Women in Steel Toes on Instagram. And they asked, what is your biggest or favorite accomplishment on site so far?
So this actually comes in the recent days. Like I mentioned, I've been on the same job site for about 2 months now, which has given me the opportunity to build on skills over time. So it's a bigger job site. And like I said, it's about 32 units. So when we move from unit to unit, I'm doing the same things unit to unit. But, in one unit, it might take me a half an hour to complete this specific task or whatever it is. But in the next unit, that time might be down to 20 minutes. I might get it down to 15 minutes. I find more efficient ways to build on the skills. So kind of having this long period of time where I can work and doing the same things has been really helpful for me. Like that repetition, like I said, like when I first started at this building, we actually were doing foam and strapping on the exterior walls to prep it for siding. And at first it was so awkward. It was so awkward trying to cut this foam and figure it out and, put the strapping on and be able to hold the 1x3 wood with the level to get it, it was so difficult. But by the end of the building, I had done it for, a week and a half straight. By the end of the building, I could do it no problem. So kind of that repetition, it instills this confidence in you, like, oh my gosh, I'm getting it. Like, it's kind of this aha moment of, oh my gosh, I'm actually able to complete these tasks. So that has really helped me, especially as a woman, because when I struggle with things, the first thing that comes to my mind subconsciously is, I can't do this because I'm a woman, and, maybe I don't belong here,
Interesting.
And so when I gain that confidence, it's okay, maybe I struggled with that because I'm an apprentice and I've never done that before, so
Exactly.
it changes that, and it kind of gives you that confidence. Like starting out, that was my biggest thing was, okay, maybe there is a reason that, there aren't women in the trades. Like I struggled a lot with that. But kind of pushing through that. And once you gain that confidence, you're like, oh my gosh, no, it's just because I've never done that before, and give it a few weeks and I'll be able to do it type of deal. So that's been a huge accomplishment. Honestly, it's the greatest feeling in the world.
Getting your reps in. I love it.
Yeah.
What do you think we can do to help influence the next generation of apprentices in your mind?
Obviously, I'm going to say diversity off the bat. There's definitely something to be said about a diverse workforce. As a female, I've been told that I bring different skills to the table. A lot of women are more focused on attention, or give more attention to detail. There we go. We'll be more focused on like the little small details that a lot of guys just wouldn't even think twice about. So that definitely brings a different aspect to the workplace. That's a strength in and of itself, where it improves the quality of your work. So not only that, but I think we're doing a great job of getting women into the trades. Like, yes, there's still a lot of progress to be made, but there are more women slowly considering, this is a workplace that I can be in. This is a career option for me, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, I don't want to sit on a job site with all white women and say, yep, you know what, guys, we did it. There's so much more to this. Like, this is just getting women on a job site is just one more step. We need to work on, more diversity. We need more ethnic diversity on a workplace or in a job site. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much more to it than just girls need to go into the trades. You need to look at how can we get other races into the trades and stuff like that. So definitely building on that will change the industry. And I hate to bring it up, like, because I know everyone's been talking about it the past few months, the whole rise of COVID-19. I've noticed that the way we've done things on job sites has changed dramatically in this upcoming pandemic. And so that gives me a lot of hope, seeing that we've entirely changed our policies, the way we do things, everything in a matter of weeks due to a global pandemic. Why can't we change the way we do things in a matter of weeks in terms of diversity? So it definitely does give me hope in the sense that construction was able to easily adapt and overcome these issues. Why can't we continue that in other areas, right?
I love it. That's awesome. That's such a good reframe. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah.
Good for you. Your parents raised you right, I can tell.
They tried.
Now, one of the questions I was going to ask you was, why do you love construction so much? But I feel that we've gotten the gist from what I asked you already. Sure. And, maybe you have a story that's different than learning how to put reps in, but do you have any favorite stories? And they could just be funny stories or anything that you have from the job site.
So actually, a couple weeks ago, and I posted it on my Instagram, I walk into the break room. It was a Friday. Walk into the break room for, our afternoon break. And I've been keeping like my lunch up to this point. And by lunch, I mean pop and chips because, I have the diet of a 12-year-old. And so I walk into the break room and I keep them usually in the studs, in between the studs of the wall. And they're not there. And I'm like, and everyone, like, I walk in and everyone's just laughing hysterically. So I'm like, oh God, what did I walk into? And they're all laughing. And the one guy finally chirps up and he says, oh, it must really suck being short. And so I look up and they screwed my lunch to the ceiling. Yeah. And so that was hysterical because, honestly, it was a pretty good joke. Like, it was pretty funny, but it's one of those things where you're with these guys for at least 40 hours a week. You got to have fun when you're doing things. I remember when I was just starting out, it would have been a few months into my apprenticeship. We were just making cuts, that was my job, bark out, whatever, measurements, and I cut. And the one time we were working with this certain type of siding where every end needed to be painted. So I was working really hard on painting this end and I didn't even notice, I had no spatial awareness of who was around me. And one of my coworkers slipped a toad into my tool pouch. He caught a toad somewhere in the grass. I don't even know. Caught this little frog and put it in my tool pouch. So then when I went to go make a cut, I reached for my square and I pulled out a toad and I was like, this isn't what I was looking for.
No kidding.
But like things like that where it's good to have that kind of ability to have fun on a job site. If you're not loving what you're doing, if you're not having fun, if you're not laughing at least 3 times a day, like what are you doing there really? And so things like that is just why I love this industry so much. Like you can have a great time and still get work done, right?
Yeah. You know what? I think you have the right attitude. I think that that's the attitude you need to adopt in construction. It's a different work environment. It can be fun if you treat it that way. And although it can be physically challenging, it can be mentally challenging at times. I think that you've adopted the mentality that you need to be in construction. And I commend you for that. And I think that you're doing a great job. And I look forward to catching up with you next year and the year after. And when you become a journeyman and seeing everything that you've gotten up to, it's exciting watching you grow, and it's been really cool. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you and talk about any of the things that we've mentioned on this podcast or otherwise in regards to apprenticeship, where's the best place for people to reach you?
So best place right now is honestly just email me. I'll give you my email, Colin, and you can post it wherever.
Sounds good.
Just shoot me an email. I'm pretty responsive to them for the most part. get back to you within a few hours type of deal. If you have any questions at all, absolutely anything. If you're a young woman with long hair who has even any tips, let me know. Totally open to options. But yeah, stuff like that. I'm super open, and I love connecting with other people in the trade. So yeah, just
awesome.
email me.
So I will link to everything that we talked about, and I'll have your email address available on toolspodcast.com/May, like the month of May. And Delaney, it's been awesome having you on the monthly Toolbox Talk. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story. And I hope that anybody listening that's thinking about getting into apprenticeship is able to find some value in this conversation. So thank you so much again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. For show notes, blog posts, resources, and access to our newsletter, check out toolspodcast.com.